Morning, everybody. Benny Goodman's not coming on. Oh no. Maybe I can find it someplace else.
Presenting Benny Goodman and
This'll do. Hey Chris, hey Phil, hey Wendy, Eric, Debbie, Mona, hey Dina, hey Karen. Oh, thanks Timothy. Hey Betsy, Kim, and Libby. Hey, Kathleen, Libby, and Becky. Hey, Amber. Hey, Kim. Morning, Cindy and Detroit. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Lisa. Barbara, good morning. Hey, Jacqueline in New Jersey. Hey, Frank. I spent my morning and the last couple of days doing work on the next podcast episode. All right, Bob. Hey, Nancy. Nobody's required to donate, but it'd be a lot cooler if you did. All right. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Larry. Hey, Joanne. Toby. Morning, Kimberly in New Hampshire. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Jean. Oh, thank you, Wendy. Morning, Mike. Morning, Mom. Hey, Bridget. I still haven't decided what to do next Sunday yet. Hey, Daryl. Hey, Rose. Hey, Sherry Ann, and Jay. Next Sunday, maybe I'll do it like further down the river walk. But I gotta be kind of scaling back a little bit for October. I gotta be focusing a lot more on the October stuff. I've kind of written September off, honestly. Numbers have been way down. I'm not doing in-person stuff this week or next weekend. Hey Gail, hey Sherry, hey Stacy, Jean, Casey, and Gail. Hey Ava. Oh, thanks, Kathy. Oh, hey Miles. Miles has climbed up on here. He was just over in Ronnie's office, clear on the other side of the house. Poor Miles has been kind of depressed lately. Hey Kelly, he's going through that cycle you do with new kittens, where first you're kind of threatened, then you're a great big brother, then you realize you have to share your toys. We got some that are supposed to be just for him. I only break them out when she's safe-roomed. But she'll play with anything. And he doesn't really like watching her play with his toys or sitting in his spots. Do you, Miles? Hey, Octavio. Oh, that'll be fun. Hey, Karen. Hey, Jeanette. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Celtic Warrior over on Twitch. Hey, Libby. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Dina. Good morning, Donna and Sue. Hey, Karen and Jay. Miles is taken to sitting in the toy box, like guarding him. It's like, there's only a few dangly toys that he really, really plays with. But he doesn't love having to share very much. Chris, he'll get on the shelf when I'm not filming. More so, if anything. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Doris. Oh, thanks for the Venmo, Robert. Hey, Octavio. Hey, Marty. He seems so big now that we have the kitten here. Hey, Nancy. He's been kind of low energy the last few days. He's got a vet appointment next week, just to make sure everything's okay. I think it's just the stress of a new kitten. And she's wearing him out, too. She wants to play constantly. And he's a big grown-up 2-year-old now. Hey, Alexandra. Oh, hey, Kristen. Have fun on your plans. You've seen this one before, I'm sure. Hey, Susan. Hey, Kathy. I'm losing a lot of people to plans these days, but that's all right. Hey, Kathy. Hey, Todd. I am love faithful with all my heart. Hey, Keely, Haley. Morning, Aaron. Good morning, Cheryl. Hey, Melissa. And of course, there won't be Sunday morning tours through October. So I'll be busy with in-person stuff. Hey, Todd on Twitch. Morning, Melissa. Hey, Kathleen. And the numbers are down enough that I feel like people are well ready for me to take a bit of time off. But then I'll be back in full force through the winter. Hey, Gail. Hey, Sherry. Hey, Ellen. Hey, Nancy. Hey, Sherry. Yeah, Stacy, that's just it. A lot more people are going to come when there's when the weather's not so nice outside. Today is the last day in the forecast where we've got days that's scheduled to be over 80 degrees. After this, it's all 70s and 60s. Still warmer than usual over this time of year, but at least I can get behind it. Morning, Elaine. Hey, Heather, Sandra, and Cindy. With all my... But yeah, we'll only have morning tours 6 days a week in October. Thursdays continue apace. That's still going to be in virtual night. And it'll allow me to do some of the stuff that I can't do on the walking tours. Like we'll do ghost tours outside of the loop. Hey, Marie. Well, Octavia, if you want out of jury duty, there's a classic joke about say something racist. No, mention the phrase ambulance chaser, and they will never pick you for the jury. Hey, Gina. Morning, Grandma Bell. Hey, Lana.
Goes way back and gets a lot of rhythm out of Walt, Jenny, Benny Goodman and his orchestra.
Where'd you get to? Huh. Morning, Kathy in Vegas. Yeah, Sue, I'm kind of motivated right now to put up some Halloween decorations. We'll see if I'm still motivated after I do the show, not just exhausted. Often after the show, I am in fact rather exhausted, shutting down the mail, so anybody's got tech support problems. That's the one nice thing about not having such high numbers, is at least I don't get as much tech support-ish questions. Yeah, I'm thinking of moving the giant Monstera plant so I got more room for the bats for Halloween. It's about that season. I gotta get my bats going. Morning, Luann. Hey, Chris. Heather, yo, you guys all know how it works. New people don't always, though. Hey, John. Priya didn't get me up this morning. She was pretty quiet until about 5 a.m. And then I'm up anyway. Hey, Robert on YouTube. Hey, Denise and Patty. And Susan and Marita. Every time I've gotten jury duty, they want me clear up in Skokie. This was before I had a car, too. Alright, we'll let Benny Goodman run a little bit longer.
They all loved it. They all loved those bastards when they played by
Awesome, Julie. Can't wait to see you there.
In the same vein. Rosetta.
You'll notice some of my Halloween bats are still up. I just don't have the whole cloud of bats like I did before. And there's a whole different lighting scheme, too. Alexa, Halloween. See? Like that. Alexa, webcam. Hey, Kathy. Well, I try to get my steps in, and if I don't get my steps in early in the morning, it'll be hot outside. It's hot enough at 5 a.m. Hey, John. Hey, Audrey. Morning, me mateys. Oh, yes, it is Talk Like a Pirate Day, isn't it? Arr, it be International Talk Like a Pirate Day. You'd think a pirate's first favorite letter was R, but his first love is the C. Nora. I only actually had to go into jury duty once, and they ended up settling the case. They wouldn't have picked me either. I could smell an ambulance chaser a mile away. Yeah, Kim, that would get people a lot of times on ghost tours expect me to talk like this the whole time. That would get really tiresome after about a minute. Be fun for a second, but then I start to look like a first-class ding-dong. You know that one about the pirate with a steering wheel in his pants? This isn't the After Hours tour. Alright, we'll let Benny get to a stopping place here. Hey, Tony. Arr, it's driving me nuts.
Music by Benny Goodman is being presented from the Joseph Urban Room of the...
Alright, everybody, I think that's about enough from Benny Goodman for the morning. Welcome along, everybody. Welcome along to the dark history of Madison Street here in Chicago. This is one of the tours that I would do in person, but it's just too long to walk for most people. But I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years now. I've got about 20 or so books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, Ghosts of Chicago, the now rare collector's item, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, and coming next year, the Graceland Cemetery book, which I saw on the pre-orders is now slated for June, so they've kicked it back another 2 months. But there's supply chain issues. Everybody's book is getting delayed at this point. So one thing I do a lot when I spend my time in the newspaper archives and the legal archives just collecting stories to tell on tours, I notice that there are a lot of them that take place on one little stretch of road. This is why I could do like the Dark History of Taylor Street tour all over a 1 mile stretch. And there's other areas around where I could do this sort of thing. There's quite a lot on Madison, which cuts right through the loop at the direct middle of the city based on the grid system. But it stretches a lot further than most people would want to go, all the way from Michigan Avenue out to Damon, which is about 2.5 miles. Not a bad walk, really, if you get up and walk every day, but more than most people want to do on a walking tour. Plus, there's a lot of spaces in between, but it's perfect for a virtual tour. So that's what we're going to do over the course of the next 40 minutes or so. I'm going to tell some stories from Madison, starting right here at Wabash Street, at the L track. This is how the L tracks there looked back in the old days. Now, back in 1921, there was a woman by the name of Jeanette Hoy. She lived in an apartment called the Eleanor Club. It was hard for single women to get apartments in those days. You occasionally hear that it was illegal, which is stretching things a little bit. But It was kind of hard for single women to get safe apartments, but there were a series of apartments called the Eleanor Club that rented rooms to single women and also provided recreation and activities. Jeanette Hoy met a young woman there. They became fast friends. Jeanette, however, wanted to be more than friends and got fairly insistent about this. Eventually, that friend told Jeanette, "I don't ever want to see you again." And Jeanette, in a rage, came to see her when the train pulled in right here, and shot at her friend, then ran into the alley nearby to shoot at herself. Now, the friend decided not to press charges. Jeanette managed to shoot herself and the friend without doing any particular damage. The friend was they were both in the hospital for a little bit, but not very long. And after that, Jeanette at least acceded to her demands not to talk to her anymore. Then in 1924 did the same thing to somebody else. Now, the story takes a darker turn here. After 1924, Jeanette was put in an asylum. And clearly there was something going on upstairs if she's going to go around shooting people like that. I'd like to hope that she got the care that she needed, given that it was 1924 and after this she disappears off of the record. Kind of doubt that it happened. But let's start moving a little ways down here. We'll take a bit of a spin past Louis Sullivan's design for the Carson Perry Scott building, originally Selfridge's, but only for about a month, and proceed a little bit further down. Now, straight ahead, you can see this building with the rows and rows of glass. Not the first one you see there, but the one with all of the elongated windows over here to the right now. This marks the approximate location where McVicker's Theater used to stand. Now, there were several iterations of McVicker's Theater over the years. There was one that stood there before the Great Chicago Fire. There was this one here that was built after the fire. This is the third version, opened in 1891. There was another one after that, eventually became a movie house and survived up through the 1970s. It is perhaps most famous today because of the fact that in 1862, for a few weeks, John Wilkes Booth performed there. Now, he played most of the big Shakespeare roles. It was like a different Shakespeare play every night. Shakespearean actors in those days had to have a lot of different parts memorized. He played Macbeth, he played Richard III, he played lots and lots of roles where he had to assassinate a head of state. The Chicago Tribune said that he was brilliant. He gave receptions at the Tremont House where people fawned over how nice he was. But of course, even then, nobody could resist comparing him to his far more famous brother. His brother Edwin is shown here with his wife, Mary McVicker, the daughter of the family that had built the place. Now, she had initially been a child actress, but after she outgrew that, she retired from the stage gracefully until Edwin Booth came through. About 5 or 6 years after his brother had played there, and long after his brother had been killed and forgotten, and it was forbidden to mention him around Edwin, he fell in love with young Mary, who by then was in her late teens, and persuaded her to go on stage again playing Juliet to his Romeo. The reviews were absolutely terrible. I read some of them on the Rose Hill Cemetery tours when we get to Mary's grave, but she embarked on a long career as an actress away from then. Now, there's one other thing we can bring up about McVickers, a really weird little connection to H.H. Holmes, the Devil in the White City guy. With most of Holmes' victims, we don't have a photograph of them. We just have drawings of photographs that were published in the newspapers at the time. Most notable among these was a woman named Emmeline Cigrand. Emmeline Cigrand moved to Chicago in May of 1892, having previously worked downstate at an alcoholism cure place. Was known as a very romantic young woman. She would put quotes of poetry at the end of all of her letters, like adding a signature to your emails, only you have to actually write it out every single time. It was sometimes said that she was fired from her old job because she was just too much of a dreamer. She wasn't that reliable a worker. But she moved to Chicago and got a job working for H.H. Holmes in his famous building down on 63rd Street that we now refer to as the Murder Castle. December of that year, after a secretive affair with Holmes, she disappeared from history completely. Holmes told everybody that she had gone off and gotten married. Later, he changed his story and said that she had died during an abortion. Now, all that we really have as to what she looked like for sure are drawings like this. Newspapers were in a place at this time where they had figured out how to reproduce drawings very quickly and easily, but photographs, they weren't quite there yet. But there was this thing going around. I was working with the History Channel on a show, and they were working with this box of photos that they had found that included some Holmes documents. Now, the rest of the photos weren't really labeled. we couldn't really trace them to things. There was like one that was supposed to be Patrick Quinlan Holmes' janitor, but it was really a picture of a whole different guy of the same name. But there was this one picture that looked like this, that really did kind of look like Emmeline to me. The most interesting part of it was that it's from the McVickers Theater building. It was taken in the Stevens Photography Studio. And we do know that Emmeline was in this building. She had a friend living in the building and went to visit her, where she told about her fiancé, who was probably H.H. Holmes, though she was giving him a different name. She gave her fiancé a different name to every single person she talked to. Now, it's impossible to say for sure. We just don't have enough data here, but in this case, we know that it looks, not only does it look about right, we can at least trace the subject to having been in the right building. Now, all the time, people send me possible lost photos of Holmes, and it's just some guy in a mustache labeled someplace in Maine with no connection whatsoever. But this is about as close as I would get. I definitely wouldn't give it a for sure, or maybe not even a 50%, but it's the closest thing I've seen to a possible picture of Emmeline Sagrand. Let's proceed just a little bit further down. And just across the street, the next building you come to, I got the volume up there, I'll turn that down, is the Chase Tower. Built by the same architect who did the FBI building in Washington, D.C. This being a much smoother design, a much better use of brutalism. Gorgeous little swooping design. Right on the spot where it stands, though, in 1928, the mob gave one of their most public hits when they killed a guy by the name of Tony Lombardo. Now, Tony Lombardo was the head of the Unione Siciliana, the hand-picked head of the Unione, a civic organization that by then was basically a front for the mob, the hand-picked guy of Al Capone. Now, Capone, not being Sicilian, couldn't be the president of the Unione Siciliana, but he could pick somebody who was. It was an untold amount of power for this. But by the 1920s, being the head of the Unione Siciliana meant that you probably weren't going to live very long. One president after another was assassinated. Now, Capone's mentor had been a guy named Frankie Yale back in Brooklyn. He had worked as a bouncer at his club, and at least according to legend, he was brought into Chicago several times to perform the high-profile hits. If they wanted something, if they were going to bump off somebody like Big Jim Colosimo, they might call in somebody from New York. Now, on the one hand, that makes sense. On the other, I just can't imagine a guy as powerful as Frankie Yale was at the time coming all the way to Chicago to do that kind of grunt work. But at some point along the way, Frankie Yale started working with Bugs Moran and the North Side Gang. And as a result, in what must have seemed like a real betrayal for Capone, Frankie Yale was bumped off. This was probably ordered by Capone. It was later found that the guns that had killed Frankie Yale were the same guns later used in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. But shortly after the death of Frankie Yale, Tony Lombardo was killed right there in front of that building. Now, right at Madison and Dearborn, and right at rush hour, too. This was about as crowded a place as you could find anywhere, certainly in Chicago. It was like right in the heart of the Loop, one of the busiest intersections in the United States, and he was shot down in broad daylight. Now, part of the way that this happened, the way that somebody was able to do the shooting and get away with it, was they were bringing an airplane into the building to work as a display in a department store. Now, everybody on the street was kind of like, ooh, look at them moving a plane inside of the building. While they were all looking up, Lombardo was walking down the street, a couple of shooters shot him, and that was that. So another one of those things where there's a lot of different theories as to who exactly the shooters were. Presumably someone connected to the North Side Gang, widely believed to be in revenge for the killing of Frankie Yale, but it's impossible to know for sure at this point. But this was the most public mob hit. You tend to hear all these stories about the mob, like hiding bodies in places in Indiana or in the pond by Bachelor's Grove or cement shoes in the river. Usually they left the bodies out where people could see them. They wanted to send a message with these kind of hits. And we'll proceed just a little bit further down the alley from there. Just a little bit further west. Kind of get around the corner here. Throws a little sore from all the screaming at the music gig yesterday, but I got to be getting it stronger for October. I I haven't had days with multiple walking tours regularly in a long time. This is what this stretch of the road would have looked like back around the 1890s. This little section was where most of the big newspaper offices were at the time. It was sometimes referred to as the Madhouse on Madison Street. Now, right around the corner from it would have been Newsies Alley. I love talking about Newsies Alley. The Newsies were such a strange society, shown here having a chicken fight, as they often did. When Newsies weren't selling papers, they were almost always gambling over something. But this was an alley that ran alongside Madison Street. There were offices going back into most of the newspaper offices there. The Newsies were almost like an entirely self-sufficient, ungoverned society of children. A great many of them were homeless. Some of them slept on benches in Newsies Alley. Some of them came from good families who just wanted them to have a taste of working. But really, it was kind of a Lord of the Flies situation with these kids. For the most part, they got along fairly well. They were about the most diverse group of kids in all of Chicago. Not necessarily the most polite. These were largely unsupervised children. And moreover, they even became kind of a farm team for the Chicago gangs in the 1910s. Now, all throughout the 1910s, there was a thing going on called the Circulation Wars, where newspapers had gotten fiercely competitive, and were not above using dirty tricks, like busting up newsstands that weren't carrying the right papers, busting up newsies who weren't working for the right papers, making sure that newsies were taking more papers than they could actually sell just to keep the circulation numbers up. Now, it's hard to know exactly how true the stories about these things are. They weren't that well documented because naturally newspapers didn't really want to report them, except for a couple of smaller ones that didn't have the money to be involved themselves. Like, there was one of them, the Chicago Daybook, talked about it quite a bit. It's been widely rumored that Dean O'Banion, later the head of the North Side mob, got his start as a newspaper slugger. I haven't been able to verify that, but it's in print back to at least 1930, only 6 years after his death, which is pretty early for a gangster story to be moving. Now, eventually, Colonel McCormick of the Tribune said that 27 people were killed in the various battles over the course of the 1920s. The sluggers were organized originally by a guy named Mo Annenberg, who later bought the Philadelphia Inquirer, went to jail for tax fraud after being sentenced by the same judge who sentenced Al Capone for the same crime. But we do know that at least a couple of the major gangsters got their start in this way. Most notably, the one that we can name specifically is Spike O'Donnell. Here he is in 1916, little Spike O'Donnell held for murder, got his early rough life training with the newspapers. Now, this was just the start for O'Donnell. He had ended up being a part of the Spike O'Donnell gang, one of the gangs that nominally worked for Capone but kind of operated independently over on the west side of this place. Now also, this wasn't just the alley for the Newsies either. Also, right in the middle of the alley would have been in the 1890s an entrance to the Whitechapel Club, which was kind of a reporters club, mostly newspaper reporters who worked on the crime beats. They would gather here, they had skeletons, they had skulls, they had actual murder weapons, they had nooses that had been used in executions. They would open meetings by dipping their fingers in the ashes of one of their former members who had been cremated out on the dunes, that they had cremated personally out on the dunes, in fact. And these were guys who worked in jobs that kind of required them to have a dark sense of humor. And eventually became a fairly famous social club around the city. It only lasted a few years. You can see just from the picture that they were very forward-thinking guys. This is a picture from the 1890s. Only a couple of them have mustaches. There's an interesting thing in the 1930s when they reminisced about the Whitechapel Club. One of them even mentioned, even in those days, we did not have mustaches, even though everybody else did. This is long before nowadays, when people see a man still with his whiskers and shout, "Hey, Beaver!" Which I guess was a thing in the 1930s. In the 30s, if you were young and hip and clean-shaven and saw some guy still with his facial hair, you said, "Hey, Beaver." It was like the "Hey, Boomer" of its day. Let's move a little bit further down Madison Street. Good day, Rebecca. Good day, all of you joining us late. And of course, we've been to the Whitechapel Club on multiple time travel pub crawls. I gotta get another one together for Halloween. Also, we're planning on a time travel brunch crawl eventually. I was going to do that this month, but I just didn't end up having the time. But over here we are at Madison and Wells. Now, Madison and Wells was There's any number of stories I could tell here. The one that I tend to focus on was 1857. There was a guy by the name of Thompson stopping here with his apprentice, who was a young black man, a 16-year-old named Samuel Gantz. Now, Gantz had lived with him in Pennsylvania since he was about 2. He was probably an orphan. Worked as an apprentice. It was the same situation you would see with any white kid who was an apprentice. You know, he was free. He lived in Pennsylvania. But people saw them coming into Chicago, and the rumor was that young Sam Gantz was being taken into slavery. So they brought in Allan Pinkerton to investigate. And the idea was Pinkerton was a well-known abolitionist. He had come to Chicago specifically to work on the Underground Railroad. And in those early days, a lot of what his detectives did, before they got involved in stomping out organized labor, was working on Underground Railroad and fugitive slave cases. So Pinkerton was brought in to investigate. He interviewed Samuel Gantz, was satisfied that he was free and was not being taken down south, let alone into slavery, and attempted to accompany them to the train. But the plan kind of backfired. People saw Allan Pinkerton and said, Pinkerton is involved. Of course this is a fugitive slave case. So right over here they chased the carriage that they got into all the way to Madison and Wells, at which point they pretty much knocked it over. Eventually Pinkerton, Thompson, and Gantz were charged with inciting a riot because the people said that he just shouldn't have gotten involved because he knew what was going to happen. The Tribune had an interesting response. Eventually, the arrest was really just to get them away from the mob. They got them into a train, and Gantz and Thompson went on their way. The Chicago Tribune had to say, though, we cannot blame the colored men of this city for the jealousy with which they watch anything that looks like an attempt to take one of their color back to slavery, that bitter, crushing, terrible slavery which so many have suffered. Of course, it says cruising here. And I'm going to quick open up the, while I'm on the subject of this, it's kind of just us chickens here today, but I'm going to show you another one that I just found, another thing like that. Now and then you find an amusing typo. I'm working on a new episode of the Only Minis in the Building podcast right now. I'm working on one about the second Minnie Williams. There was a Minnie Williams who was killed by H.H. Holmes and another Minnie Williams who was killed by a famous murderer in San Francisco. There's a little thing about her in a newspaper, in a San Francisco paper that I ran to yesterday. I think it was supposed to say she had to shift for herself. $1894 San Francisco, everybody. Now let's move along a little bit further here. That's one of the stories that comes up. There's so many Underground Railroad stories like that in Chicago. That one's not usually on my Underground Railroad tour. It's just not technically it. We'll move just a little bit further down. And we come to one of the most magnificently cool buildings in the city. The Civic Opera Building. (1929) Graham Anderson, Probst and White, the architects. We'll be seeing the back view of this on the boat tour in a couple of weeks. And possibly next weekend if I do the rest of the Riverwalk. And also, they tend to have the best message board signs in the business. This one says, by the way, you look great in that mask. Awesome. Civic Opera Building, opened 1929, just a few weeks after the stock market crash. There are lots and lots of urban legends about this building. One of them was a story that Mr. Insel, who built the place, built it for his wife, who couldn't make it as an opera singer in New York, so he said, baby, I'll build you an opera house. You'll notice this is the exact plot of Citizen Kane. Really, his wife was an actress, not a singer. They were barely even on speaking terms by the time he built this place. Harold Fowler McCormick did bust up his marriage for an opera singer of questionable talents, but didn't go so far as to build an opera house himself. There's also the story that he built it like a throne with the back of it facing east, as though he could sit on it and turn his back to New York, because they wouldn't take his wife for the opera. This is a great story, but it happens to have no basis in fact whatsoever. Really, the reason it's shaped the way it is partly you've got the theater down below. The two towers on the side were supposed to be office towers that would keep it afloat. Because even in the 1920s, opera was not really a moneymaker. It cost so much to put operas on that even if you sold out every ticket, you probably weren't going to make too much money. So the towers on the side were supposed to be offices whose rent money would help keep the opera afloat. which is a great idea, but it didn't really work out so well. They opened this place in November of 29, a few weeks after the stock market crash that kicked off the Great Depression. People didn't really notice the effects right away unless they were actual stockbrokers, but Insel himself lived up in the penthouse, which is now an office, eventually lost all of his money and all the money of about 30,000 investors in his holding company. Notably absent from his own family plot. Here's a picture of it just when it was first under construction. Now, in 1931, there actually were a couple of suicides inside of the place. Anton Mark, a wealthy manufacturer, in 1931. The effects of the Depression started to hit. And also, even just during construction of the thing, a Chicago daredevil decided that he was going to climb up the thing and do a handstand on top of it. And this stunt not only ended up killing him when he fell, but also killed somebody who was down below and watching. Now, there's actually film footage of this guy doing his stunts. This one was, this stunt, Rudy Camino, the daredevil. This is not him at the Civic Opera building. But here's a quick newsreel footage of him doing his act. This is up on the north side someplace. This is possibly the Palmolive building, maybe? Oh, my fear of it. He was fine there. He didn't fall that far. And my fear of heights is fully activated watching this, though. Now, Kathy has an interesting question. Were men jumping out of windows in Chicago like they did in New York? I'm not sure. I wonder if that's even something that really happened as much as we think it did. Our collective memory of it is people jumping out the window. I imagine they were just as apt to use more common methods of suicide than that. But I'd have to check into it. All right, Rudy and his act, everybody. One of the times that he was more successful in it. We'll zip across the river here to Holabird and Ruth's Chicago Daily News building and some Art Deco on the river. And we'll walk right up to this one. Now, here's the cool thing is this whole promenade out in front of it. And I'll zip around again so we can see the promenade a bit better. This whole space was a public, almost like a park when it opened, which was a very new idea. They didn't really have public expanses out in front. And if you look around the edge, you can see all of these frescoes carved into it. And a lot of the frescoes carved in are names of famous publishers, like Mr. Pulitzer of the New York World, Mr. Medill of their rival Chicago Tribune. To the right there, Benjamin Franklin, early newspaper publisher in the United States. Now, notably absent from any of this, though, is Wilbur F. Story of the Chicago Times. You all know what I think of Wilbur F. Story of the Chicago Times. Let's move a bit down from here. We'll see a lot more of that building on the river tour. And probably next week's expanded Riverwalk virtual tour. So we'll proceed a bit further. Right over here at about Madison and Clinton was a hotel called the Galt House. Pretty nice place. So 1891, there was a guy by the name of George Painter. George was living with a woman named Alice Martin, who was not his wife. This was fairly shocking to people in 1891. Now, George Painter didn't work. He spent most of his time drinking Alice's money away, and was known to be brutal, and was also having an affair with another woman named Edwards. He also treated her badly. One night, neighbors heard Alice screaming, and some minutes later they heard George shout, "Are you people dead? Alice has been murdered!" He said he'd been over at Schiller's Saloon at Madison Canal, about a block from where we are now. Later said it was someone else who did it, and who was then later seen walking into the Galt House with blood all over his hands, saying he had just trimmed a woman over on Green Street. Now, eventually George Painter was hanged for this crime, but there was a lot of controversy. There wasn't really a lot of evidence that he had actually done it, other than the fact that he was a jerk who was and was also living with a woman who was not his wife, which at the time was fairly shocking to people. On the scaffold, when they brought him up to be hanged, he made a whole thing saying, "If I am guilty of this, let me go to hell the second after this news falls." Would an innocent man say, would a guilty man say something like this? It was kind of a badly done execution, too. The rope broke He landed on his head. They were pretty sure he was already dead, but the sentence said he must hang by the neck until he was dead, so by God, they were going to hang him by his neck until he was dead. They took the body back up, wrapped a new noose around him, slid him down the trapdoor, and had him dangle there for a minute just for the sake of appearances. A couple of years later, somebody else confessed that they were the one who had murdered Alice Martin. Whether that person was telling the truth is not really known, but in other Chicago cases throughout the 1920s, whenever somebody was arguing for clemency, they would bring up the case of George Painter as one where it had turned out they had hanged the wrong man, which I would estimate probably happened at least 20% of the time that there was a hanging in Chicago. And even a lot of the other ones, there was the police methods should not have been used. There's a picture of the gallows that were prepared for him. At the back, you can see this little booth. That was where the hangman was actually stationed. Though later it was said that there wasn't actually anybody in there. It was just so that nobody blamed the sheriff for what happened. It was really the sheriff who did everything. But here's what he said on the scaffold. If I killed Alice Martin, the girl I dearly loved, the woman I loved so much I would almost commit any crime for her, I pray this minute, my last minute on earth, that the eternal God will put me into eternal hell. Look here, gentlemen, if there is a man among you who is an American, I say to him on his soul, I say, see that the murderer of Alice Martin is found. It's kind of patriotism, the last refuge of a scoundrel, right in action there. But really, it's not the last refuge of a scoundrel, it's usually the first. Jack Cade was the one who eventually confessed that it had been him all along. Came up again in the Cardinella case when people said, no, don't hang him, it's going to turn out just like the George Painter case, you've got the wrong guy. We'll proceed a little ways across the street here, all the way to Halsted Street. This is where Carl Wanderer met the ragged stranger that he eventually killed, but that's a story I'm going to be telling so many times over October that I'll spare it from you today. But really up until about 1960, up until really the 1980s, this was a neighborhood that came to be known as Skid Row on Madison over west of Halsted Street. But it had been really for a long time. In fact, in 1915, there was a huge riot here. Pastor and Haymarket's anarchist widow behind bars, other figures in West Side riot of jobless workers. It was a riot came up of people who were out of work. You can scroll down here a little bit. This is Mrs. Lucy Parsons, one of the widows of the guys from the Haymarket, one of the Haymarket anarchists who was hanged for rioting for the 8-hour workday back in the 1880s, 30 years before this, and she was still on the scene. So, some very interesting things came up here. Women help police slug police. A lot of the women from Hull House were involved in this march for workers' rights and better food and better treatment and better work days. And quite a number of people, including ministers, ended up being held. Jane Addams examined the whole thing and decided that what had probably happened was that it was a peaceful march until the police came in and decided that they would be heroes by busting people's heads. This came up at the time. They tried to blame everybody, said the IWW, the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World are the really bad ones here. They're out trying to bust everybody up. But also, Father Tucker, a minister, said, when the city of Chicago authorizes wild beasts, the police, to slug hungry men publicly to playing the words of the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread, I say the city has declared itself anti-Christian, atheistic, and anarchistic. He was in jail at the time when he said that. Police were accused by Hull House of starting the West Side riot. Eventually, they were bailed out by Mary Wilmarth, who is now part of the Graceland Cemetery tours occasionally. And the very next week, people started turning on Jane Addams. The real agitators, the real far-left guys, still thought that she was a bit of a sellout. That's the way these things go. I'll move a little bit further west. One of my favorite bars in Chicago history. Another one that we've hit on the Time Travel Pub Crawls occasionally. Right here at 1023, right where we got this salon with a picture of a woman who looks absolutely horrifying in the coolest of all ways. But this was the site of a bar back in the 1860s and 70s known as the Hub. It was run by a guy by the name of Terrence Mullins. Well, I can't believe there's actually a picture of this guy, and I love that the picture of him is so good. Terrence or Jack Mullins. Now, in those days, Chicago had specific bars that catered to specific criminals. Now, the Hub was primarily popular with counterfeiters, but it was also popular with grave robbers. And one day after one of the big counterfeiters was put in jail, his friends were all gathered here thinking of ways that they could get him out of jail. Another guy came up and said, I know what you could do. I'm the boss of every grave robber in this city. If we got a posse together and went down to Springfield, we could steal the body of Old Man Lincoln. Then we'll hold it for ransom, get lots of money, and get your friend out of jail. So this posse was organized. They made a plan to steal the body of Abraham Lincoln over meetings at the pub right where that little salon is now. Now, eventually they did get to Springfield. They busted into the tomb overnight. In those days, Lincoln's coffin was inside of this white marble sarcophagus. They managed to get it about halfway out, but it turned out one of the guys that was in the posse was also working for the feds. So they had the coffin about halfway out when he gave the signal. And thereafter, well, lesson number one, when you're forming a posse, make sure nobody in the posse is actually working for the feds. The trouble is, the way the laws were written, it wasn't necessarily illegal to steal a dead body in those days. These guys ended up going to jail for the attempted theft of a $75 coffin. Just go a little bit across the street from that. We'll just talk briefly. In 1907, Ben Reitman founded a college for hobos, back when this was the Skid Row section. He founded this hobo college where hobos could come, get a hot meal, play some board games if they felt like it, get a cup of coffee, and also have public talks about things like health and tips for how to be a hobo, how to be a better hobo. They would get lectures on birth control from Emma Goldman, who was an often on-again, off-again lover of Ben Reitman himself. Ben Reitman called himself the king of the hobos. Then when they found out he owned a car, they kind of decided that he was a sellout. This is what this particular corner looked like just a couple of decades back. And here is our friend Scott playing Ben Reitman at a reenactment of this. And just over on the 1200 block. Patty asked, did she romance hobos too? Emma Goldman romanced whoever the hell she felt like. Right here where the children's haircut place is, was originally the site of the doctor's office operated by Thomas Neal Cream, who looks exactly the way you'd hope an 1800 serial killer would look. Thomas Neal Cream was eventually executed in London for having performed abortions on young women and then given them painkillers which were absolutely loaded with strychnine. Way, way, way too much strychnine. He got in trouble in Chicago twice. Once was because a patient died on the table. He was acquitted for that one. And once because his girlfriend's husband died of poisoning. That time he was caught, and the gravestone out in Garden Prairie still says poisoned by his wife and Dr. Cream. For that one, he did some time in Joliet. In the middle, one that he got away with is there was a young woman named Alice Montgomery who came to him. Then checked into a boarding house just down the block on Madison. And that night was heard screaming. It turned out that she had undergone an abortion that afternoon and just taken some painkillers that were absolutely loaded with strychnine. Now, at the time, nobody really connected this to Thomas Neal Cream because that wasn't a known method of execution that he was using just yet. Actually got credited in a recent Thomas Neal Cream book that just came out. Ran across this in the newspaper archives, read through it, was like, this sounds exactly like Thomas Neal Cream. And it turned out that boarding house was just down the block from this office space. We'll proceed on from here. I've told that one enough times now that I'm not going to dwell on it too much today. Just down here in the 1400 block. So I'll just cover briefly. There was a little boarding house over here that figured briefly in the H.H. Holmes case. Now, when H.H. Holmes was arrested, everybody who had ever met him, or probably everybody who'd ever met a strange guy with a mustache, started telling their stories to the police. Right about where the Palace Grill is now is a place run by a woman named Jenny Irons. Jenny Irons claimed that Holmes had come in here along with Minnie Williams and the two children that Holmes was traveling around with in the fall of 1894. Now, really, there's not a point in Holmes' timeline in the fall of 1894 that he would have actually been in this place. Minnie had probably been dead for a year and several months at that time, so it was a big enough story for a couple of minutes to make the papers, but didn't hold up to even a tiny bit of fact-checking. It's probably just some other guy in a hat and mustache, like everybody else had at the time. But Minnie Williams, the one he was supposedly traveling with, is the subject of the latest episode of the Only Minis in the Building podcast. You can get that on Apple Podcasts or at mysteriouschicago.com/onlyminis. I'm running just about on the edge of time here. A little further down to the 1733 block, there was a club by the name of the Bucket of Blood. Well, officially it was called the New Delaware. It was owned by a guy by the name of Jimmy Murphy, who later tried to open it as a coffee shop in the 20s. You know, liquor being illegal and all. Quite a number of stories came out of this place, also known sometimes as the Madhouse Cabaret. One of the owners of it, Jimmy Murphy, was among the suspects when a guy by the name of John Duffy was taken for a ride. John Duffy is kind of in the history books as being the first gangster to be taken for a ride. Origin of the term, the one-way ride. Duffy was a guy who was brought in by the O'Banion gang. He was a big talker, said, "Oh yeah, I've killed lots of people. I'm a great killer. I'm a perfect hitman. You should definitely hire me." But then he never actually got around to killing anybody. They would give him a job, and he'd say, "I'm just taking my time, and then never actually do anything about it. So finally, they decided the guy had become a liability, arranged for him to be picked up right outside of Al Capone's club, the Four Deuces, then took him for a ride and dumped the body by the side of the road. So Murphy, the owner of the Bucket of Blood, was one of a number of people who was brought in as a possible suspect. Owner of the Bucket of Blood, a West Madison Street dive of other days. Has dealt in booze, women, and guns all his life. Believed to have been in the murder crew and missing ever since. Just above here, we've got the other suspect, Al Brown, also known as Capone, manager of the Four Deuces. It was after this he said, "I'm just a businessman, and for no reason at all, everybody's always trying to pin something on me." No reason at all, sure. Skip ahead down to the United Center, which was a place that I really need to get a little bit more data on as a haunted place. There were a couple of articles about it in the 20th century as a long-lost Chicago haunted house. Right up at this place was a place called the Old Roby Tavern. It was right on Roby Street, which is what they called Damon Avenue in those days. It was one of the oldest houses in town and was said to be haunted by a woman who would walk around in a black robe with her hands folded. It's such a vivid image of a ghost that I wish we could get more data about who it was talking about. Now, yeah, this is the old United Center. The old stadium was known as the Madhouse on Madison, though before that was what they called the Chicago American offices. But all right, I've about run up over time at this point, trying to save my voice a little bit. Quick plug for the upcoming things. Tickets are up for all of the October events, except a couple that are still Mystericon exclusives. We'll probably list those publicly in the next couple of days because time is ticking and there's still tickets available. But tickets are up publicly for the boat tour, the second run of the boat tour on October 1st. You can get all the tickets for that on mysteriouschicago.com. Thursday night, we're going to be doing Graceland Off the Route virtually. That's a Graceland Cemetery tour, but some of the stories that I won't be telling over the course of October when I'm doing several Graceland tours. But there's certain things that are just geographically don't really lend themselves to being on the tours. So this week we'll do Graceland Off Route. Maybe next Thursday we'll do Rose Hill Cemetery Off Route. Sunday I was thinking Shooting Showgirls. Now I'm actually thinking, no, let's do another Riverwalk one like last week. That was a lot of fun. Let's do some more of that. We'll go inside of these buildings. We'll go into the Daily News building. We'll go into Union Station. That's going to be a blast. So lots of cool stuff coming up here in any case. Should you still need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, hoodie, coffee mug, etc., cafepress.com/Mysterious Chicago has all your Mysterious Chicago needs. And with that, I will put the Benny Goodman back on, and we will just hang out like always. So thanks a lot, everybody. I am Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. Where'd that Benny go? There he is.
Presenting Benny Goodman and his music.
Thanks, Kirk. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Timothy. I hit the wrong button there, didn't I? Super. There we go. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. Now I'll just hang out till I get too hungry for lunch. I'll make these a little smaller. There. I'll go find the cats shortly, too. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Susan. Yeah, Octavio, the Lion House is reopening. I don't know if I'm going to be allowed to use it on the tours, though. They've got a lot of private events in the Lion House over October. Gene, congrats! Oh no, let's not be pushing anybody in the river, Donna. The cats ought to learn this is their cue by now. Where are you guys? I think Priya is in the bedroom window in her usual hangout.
Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein. Rosetta.
I'll go find Miles in a minute. Miles swung by at the beginning. An hour before the tour started, Priya was running back and forth like a mad kitty. Wendy, quite a bit of I have memorized. I have a couple of cue cards mixed in here. Thanks, Sherryman. I'm out of tea. Got to switch to water. Now, Priya's getting more and more used to being on camera, to being around the house. She's still a little skittish by nature, but she just plays and plays and plays these days. She's kind of driving Miles nuts, I think. Miles has definitely had some allergy issues lately and possibly some stress. And is not wild about having to share his favorite places to sit or his toys. We try to keep some to be just his, but she'll play with anything. Sorry to miss you, James. We're just hanging out now. Over on YouTube. Karen, we got lots of new toys for her, but the thing is, she'll play with anything. Now, there's certain things I think Miles wants to be just his, but she doesn't recognize that yet. Most particularly the cat dancer. Octavio, yeah, there was a haunted house at Damon and Madison. Long gone now. It's like a place where there's the parking lots are now. Oh yeah, you can throw Priya pretty much anything and she will play with it. It's delightful to watch. Poor Miles, though. Well, let me go see where that guy is. Oh, they're talking about him. Miles is not in his usual hiding places, but I'll see if I can find him. Priya, I think, is in a windowsill. I don't want to bug her. There's the guy. Poor Miles. How you feeling, buddy? Let me see. You got some eye crud, but it's not too bad. See how they're all, you see all the comments? Miles the Superstar, Miles the Magnificent, the Gray Baron, Famous Kitty, still our boy. That's right. Okay.
And that would put rhythm in the beat of a
Dina, episode 3 should probably be up for about, probably be up about Tuesday.
the popular tune Thanks a Million.
Overall, Miles has been getting along with Priya a little better than he did with Charlotte. Charlotte just kind of tolerated Miles. He always wanted to play, she less so. But you almost never saw Miles and Charlotte just cuddling on the same pillow. He does do that with Priya. James, I've done Bachelor's Grove many times, but it's not worth the drama down there. There's a lot of groups that ghost hunting groups get very territorial about that place. We almost have to have a rumble just to go down there. See ya, Keely. Beverly, that's awesome. And hopefully next week they won't be filming downtown, so I'll be able to park easier. Thanks, no one on YouTube. See you, Lisa. Alright, so this is probably the last living room morning tour for Sunday. For a while now, till November. Thanks, Robert. See you, James.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about it. Trucking.
Oh, Miles. You know what I'm going to do for you, Miles? I'm going to go shut Priya in so you can play with your toy. Picked this up at the shopping center of Zero cell signal yesterday. It's got a very thin wire, so he can't really see the wire. He just sees the mouse. Well, Wendy, the Thursday night tours will still be on. Thursday night will still be on. Sundays, they'll just be working.
Goodman presents On the Alamo.
Alright, Miles getting some playtime in. And the Sunday mornings will be back in November. The numbers are down enough right now anyway that, you know, it's probably time to take a quick break. You still get morning mini tours 6 days a week. You know where Priya put the cat dancer? She's gonna be trying to hide that thing. Or I might be. I'll set him down there. Eleanor, I won't really be on vacation. I'll just be doing in-person tours those mornings. It being October, October is the busy season in the Ghost and Cemetery tour world. And you can get tickets for all of them over on MysteriousChicago.com. Oh no, these are just normal socks. I haven't ever bought Fluvog socks because I burn through socks so fast. Gene, next week there will be a virtual tour Sunday morning. But October I have a in-person tour scheduled for that time. We'll try to have a couple of them be live streamed, maybe.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra and hear Helen Ward sing. Eeny,
Now one day I gotta really crack down and find out where the urban room was at the Congress Hotel. And we'll try to go into there and it's like see where Benny Goodman played all of this stuff. Thanks, Lee. Miles is down here playing a bit. Miles has been a little low energy the past few days. He's got a vet appointment, but we think it's probably he's just adjusting. But everywhere you go, any time of day. Socks guaranteed for life? I'll take that bet. Ah, Wendy, congrats. Yeah, Bob, just look on MysteriousChicago.com. Yeah, my allergies have just been killer lately. Dina, as far as I know, all the Lincoln Park Zoo tours are going to be in person. And that's up on the event page of the Lincoln Park Zoo's web page now.
And we'll let the title speak for itself. Benny Goodman presenting Madhouse.
Alright guys, I think Miles just wants some playtime here. Happy Talk Like a Pirate Day to everybody. So, until next time, keep swashbuckling. And stay spooky, everybody. Have a great day, everybody.